What is going on, guys? Jack here, and welcome to episode 157 of the Rise to Glory, here with Gibraltar Apex, and today I have for you guys the end of Season 21 review. If you missed last episode, please do go check it out. It's more than worth your time. It was a big game. It was an epic game. That is the reason we're starting on our manager profile, but whilst we're here, let's just take a look at how things look here. So, in terms of press conferences, I've never really done them in FM, and I've never really done them in this save, and the fact my media handling is at 1% perhaps also indicates that. In terms of my other attributes, they're all fairly good. I feel like the handling of team discipline's a really tricky one. The reason that that's just quite low, I guess, is because, during every summer and winter transfer window, I get a lot of players come to me asking to leave. I tell them they're not leaving, they throw a hissy fit, the transfer window closes, we win the first 5 games of the season, and they're happy as can be at the club again. And, it's kind of this ongoing circle that I guess I've been going for on this save, and I feel like that has probably contributed to the decline in our handling of team discipline. Anyway, you can see here, 953 games played on this save, a pretty decent total, 793 games won. Our current contract runs out in 3 years' time, so I probably should look to get that renewed, really. You can see we've won 73 team competitions, 6 times runners-up. I've won, I've had 20 career achievements and 1 runner-up career achievement, so that's not too bad either. And in terms of the actual stats, you can see we broke through the 4,000 goal barrier this season, which was a really good achievement, and our kind of win percentage sits at 83% with a goal difference of 3,400, which, well, I guess isn't too shabby. If we move on to the information tab here, just so you guys can see a little bit more, obviously, professional footballer, our reputation you guys saw before. And in terms of our history, you can pause here if you want to take a look. 0 days spent on holiday, total game time, 7,640 days, 21 awards. Our biggest kind of fee spent was on Jorge Assad. That was 34.5 million. Our highest fee received, still 6 years on, remains the 35 million we got for Christian Mendes, now of Stoke City. An okay player, but definitely not a 35 million pound player. We did well there. Anyway, in terms of kind of value of players bought, you can see that sits at 436 million. Total value of players sold, just shy of 3 million. Of course, the TV revenue over the last few years really contributed to that. And £68 million paid to agents. We've given agents a lot of money over the years. Anyway, if you want to have a look at some of these other stats I've not covered, you can, of course, pause it and have a look. Let's take a look at the club stuff real quick. Let's have a look at Gibraltar Apex. How is the side doing? You know, what have we done? And how's the kind of club information looking? So here you can see the last 20 years at the club, we've won the league every single year. I get a few people ask me, Jack, do you get bored of this save? Is it boring just winning everything? I'd be a liar if I said at times it doesn't become somewhat of a drag. I feel like the fact that perhaps in some of the really easy years, I've slowed down certainly on using it, but the fact I had the instant result burn helped with the league games. But really with this save, the ongoing challenge has been to establish ourselves in Europe and, of course, try and win the Champions League and then go on to manage the national team. Of course, this year, we had a little bit of a disappointing Champions League, really, didn't we, losing the final. We'll talk about that in a second. But in terms of the actual club itself, obviously founded now 21 years ago, I've had a few people ask, Jack, why aren't you building a new stadium? Why aren't you expanding the space park? Unfortunately, in Football Manager, you can only request to build a new stadium every 20 years. And, the kind of space park, I believe, is only 11 years old now. So we've got a few more years left to play if we want to get a second new stadium in this save. Anyway, in terms of our club's general information, the reputation sits at 3.5 stars, which is a really, really good improvement. We, of course, have the nickname the Apex. We're professional. Captain is still Paul Smith, a player who had a fantastic season this year. Joe Bouchard, the vice-captain, fallen a little bit off the pace, I guess, this year in terms of our first team. In terms of rivals, we have just the one, Gibraltar Lions, as a competitive rival. I'm still hoping over the next few years we'll see some more other kind of rivals appear. A media prediction for this year was first. In terms of the finances, the chairman loves the club, we're rich. Estimated value sits at £281 million, which is good. When it comes to value in Football Manager, just so you guys are aware of this, it's basically calculated off the amount of money you have in the bank, the value of your kind of facilities, your stadium, your training facilities, and also the value of your players. Essentially, if your club was to be liquidated and all your assets turned into money, how much would they be worth? That's kind of how it works. And, interestingly, if we just have a look here, you can see Magpies, the 26th richest team in the world, which isn't too bad for a team from Gibraltar. And in fact, if you look through here, a lot of Gibraltarian teams getting onto this list, and of course, with that, they're going to have a lot of money to spend. In the case of Magpies, to be honest, they've been a pretty good team in terms of the fact that you can see here they've been in the Primera Division now for the last 5 years, consistently staying up in the division. But the thing they've done that's quite unique is they've not gone out and spent a load of money, which, to be honest, kind of slightly terrifies me. You can see they spent £100,000 this year. They're going to have a good few £100 million in the bank as one of the richest clubs in Europe, and it's going to be interesting to see over the next few years how they choose to spend that. And it's certainly been something worth noting, actually, is the fact that teams are starting to spend more money. Manchester 62 this year spent £10 million, which is a really big amount. As you can see, it was spent on a lot of smaller transfers rather than any kind of big marquee signings. And on top of course, Manchester 62 and Gibraltar Lions, College Europa are also starting to spend a little bit. They spent £7 million this year, including, you can see here, £2.1 million on Alan Richards of Notts County, a pretty good Welsh player, 28 international caps. So we're already starting to see kind of the gap between the very top Gibraltarian sides and ourselves kind of start to diminish. You know, Manchester 62, College Europa, they're starting to step up. Lincoln are doing a similar job, really. You can see that they are the 30th richest club in the world. And it's a really impressive achievement. Obviously, a long way to go if anyone wants to try and eclipse Manchester United. But Magpies, they're on their way, considering that perhaps 5 or 6 years ago they were worth diddly squat. It's not a bad achievement for a team kind of 6 years on to have been promoted from the Segunda division and really be competitive here in Gibraltar. Anyway, just going back to our club real quick, I feel like some people don't enjoy sticking around so much for the kind of squad review. So today, I want to go through everything else kind of early. So anyway, if we look at the general information here, we got as far as the value. You can see our average season ticket price is £605. We only have 800 season ticket holders, but we have been consistently selling out our stadium consisting of about 12,000 seats. So a lot of kind of fans who aren't season ticket holders come into our games. In terms of the legends, you guys can look here, just to bring out a few names, obviously. Ben Connolly, Lee Robson, and, Jack Peachman, has he dropped? He has. He's dropped to an icon, unfortunately. But they, of course, all players from the early days of this save who have kind of retired since then. Elsewhere, you've got Gary, who, of course, is still at the club, was actually out on loan this year. Paul Smith and Joe Bouchard, not entirely surprising. Ludwig Young and Daniele Russo, also in the Legends tab. In terms of icons, a few familiar names. A few, of course, Gibraltarians in there, like Tristan Sargent, Tuzon, and, of course, Anthony Hernandez. But alongside that, we have players like Van Dijk, Mosca, Mendes as well, Carlos Andres Mora, who of course left a few years ago, the Colombian, and also Aaron McVitie, who I've talked about before, but I know people skip through episodes, but he's actually the manager of Glasgow United, and this is another point to kind of bring up, is the fact that within the Primera Division, we're starting to see a bit of a surge and an improvement kind of in the quality of the managers. Now, whilst there are quite a lot of Gibraltarian managers kind of still around, we've started to see a few kind of slightly more high-profile managers come in, such as Tim Ream here. He, of course, is a centre-back at the start of the game, plays for Fulham, I want to say. He's a US international, and he's taken up the reins here at St. Joseph's, and that's kind of something that's going to be interesting to keep an eye on. Of course, the league now has a lot of money, it's gaining reputation, and hopefully we'll see a few fairly big, kind of successful managers come in, and perhaps with some slightly better manager staff stats, they will actually be able to run the club slightly better and make the Primera Division a lot more competitive. Anyway, I keep getting sidetracked. Let's go back to our club screen real quick. You can see here in the favourite personnel, Gaiganov Jr., Girard, Duz, Rildo, JJ, Vergara. Lots of familiar names there. A few of these favourite personnel, of course, people who are still at the club now and are kind of still emerging as players who are hopefully going to make themselves legends. I think for me, Sebastian Girard, perhaps the player to keep an eye out on over the next few years. He's turning into our talismanic player, an absolutely insane player. When I signed him from Standard Liège, I thought he was going to be good. Didn't think he was going to be this good, though. The 22-year-old, 20 goals in 23 games for Belgium. Tied after his last match, but just such a good player. And, this year, as you can see, 63 goals for him. Anyway, let's go on to the history tab real quick, and let's have a look at the best 11. And we'll start, first and foremost, by looking at... we can't actually look at this season's last best 11. So we'll look at the overall best 11, which you can see here. Of course, you can pause to have a look at kind of all the stats in detail. I guess the big one to pick out really is Bouchard with 550 appearances for the club. That is as many appearances, more than half of the games that I've managed at the club he's been in for. So that really gives you an idea of kind of how long term he's been at the club. Similarly, kind of with Paul Smith, 478 games for him, 370 goals as well. Just such a crazy amount. Of course, Ben Connolly and Peachman not even getting kind of to 250. Oh, in fact, no, they did break 250 between them. But really, it gives you an idea of just how good players like Paul Smith and also Moscow, who has 301 goals in 188 games, just how good they are. Tuzon, not a bad record for him either, 198 goals in 154 games. And as you can see here, I don't really know how the best 11 score is calculated, but it's quite a big kind of high number in terms of the best 11 score, and it's kind of cool to see so many players with hundreds of appearances at the club. Obviously, in my FM saves of the past, it's felt like sometimes we've rocketed up through the leagues, players haven't hung around in the first team forever. Whereas with this save, there's been players who really have established themselves as legends and will kind of go down, I guess, in Football Manager folklore for me, and hopefully for some of you guys who have been around my channel for a long time and obviously seen your fair share of kind of stories. I want to say similar to this one, but I don't feel like any have actually been that close to this one, really. Anyway, I'm going to quickly flick through all these records and stuff. I could go through them all in detail. If you want to take a look, pause it, feel free to. All in all, though, really good year this year. Disappointing to lose in the Champions League final. But the club as a whole is continuing to move forward. If we look at the Primera division, you can see it's continuing to move forward as well. It's now in the top 16 leagues. Hopefully it will rise again this summer. Where it can rise to, I don't know. It is worth noting, actually, our values for our players have been fairly low over the last few years. And I have noticed a subtle rise in them starting to kind of emerge, which could be interesting. I'm hoping that as the league continues to kind of rise, and hopefully really when we start surpassing the Championship, we'll start to see our player values go up. I've had a few people comment on the player values, of course, throughout this save. I don't really know the algorithm behind how FM calculates player values, but when you consider that our league is kind of that of a, well, you can see here, a second-tier Bundesliga team, it's why our values are so low, really. What is our most valuable player? Our most valuable player is £5.5 million. You'd struggle to find a player playing in the second tier of Germany on that kind of money. And perhaps the kind of league reputation and the continental reputation of each league that a player's playing in plays too high a role in their value. I don't really know. I feel like the simple solution, which wouldn't be simple at all, would basically FM to have some kind of check when it comes to player values to look at kind of what players are playing in what divisions and, you know, kind of what competitions they're taking part in, because obviously consistently playing in the Champions League would inflate your value of your players, which it simply doesn't do here. Anyway, looking at the league kind of table here as a whole, you can see we dominated it. I could go through this in a lot of details, but I feel like I could be analysing stuff that really isn't that important. That said, though, let's have a look at the team kind of stats, because I feel like this is where it gets a little bit interesting. I guess stuff like average possession is a bit meh, but the stuff that I would like to cover is stuff like games won in a row, which, as you can see, for us sits at 43, and also 414 games without a loss, and we've almost scored in 400 straight games. In terms of goals scored in a row, we've already talked about that. Games without losing, 414. Never going to beat that in Football Manager. Kind of accepted that. I feel like that record could go in the next few years, certainly. Teams have really been giving us good games of late, which is good to see. Anyway, in terms of other stats, I really want to go to stuff like the overall attendances, because I feel like that's where it gets a little bit interesting. So as you can see here, in terms of average attendance, we have the highest average attendance with an 81% capacity kind of sellout. Interestingly enough, College Europa getting a really high percentage, 92% of the Victoria Stadium filled by them on average, which is a really, really impressive amount. It might lead to them getting a new stadium in the next few years, hopefully with their kind of with their kind of chairman recognising the potential they have. I do find it quite interesting when we look at the average attendance, the fact that Gibraltar Lions are actually in the bottom half of attendances. Glasgow United, College Europa, Manchester 62 and Lincoln Red Imps playing attractive football and actually getting fans to turn up for their games. So Gibraltar Lions kind of perhaps showing that you can't buy popularity. In terms of stadium sellouts, Manchester 62 actually sold out 4 times this year, which is a really, really impressive achievement by them. We actually failed to sell out our stadium in the league, which is a little bit disappointing, but really our league kind of attendances have naturally always been below that of the kind of European competitions we've been in, so that's not too concerning. And you can see in terms of the highest attendance, whilst a lot of teams did have sellouts, their sellouts compared to our highest attendance, obviously, there's a massive, massive difference between them. Anyway, in terms of transfer spend, I talked about teams starting to spend a little bit more money. This is, of course, the net spend. You can see ourselves and Gibraltar Lions really the big spenders this year, but Manchester 62 spending £9 million kind of net spend after sales. College Europa spending £5 million, and also Lincoln Red Imps spending £2 million. So those teams certainly kind of starting to kind of spend the cash. In terms of overall salaries, you can see here, we are paying our players quite a lot of money as a College Europa and kind of Gibraltar Lions, which is a little bit of a shock in some ways. It's not entirely surprising, perhaps, that our salary is the highest in the league. But I have noticed with College Europa and Manchester 62, when it comes to signing players, particularly from abroad, they're giving them pretty mental contracts. For example, if we look at Pau Torres here, a decent centre-mid, certainly. He's on £23,000 a week, which obviously he would never be on pretty much in any other league. But due to our league's low reputation, the kind of teams in our league's kind of low, I guess, what's the word? They don't have much of a desirable quality about them. You know, you have to basically lure players in with money for them to come and play for you. And that's kind of the approach that Manchester 62 have taken. If we just look at their players here, in terms of biggest earners, if my columns could unfix themselves, Hector is their biggest earning player. He's on £56,000 a week, which, well, if we look at him, he's not a £56,000 a week striker, but in terms of getting this player in and, well, for Manchester 62 to sign him, it's the kind of money they're just having to offer these kind of players, which is interesting in itself to see how the game approaches that. Be interesting to see how many of these players kind of get kept hold of, I guess, with their current wages, as hopefully these teams raise in reputation and start to attract more players. Because you can see the reputation of these teams as a whole really is improving. I believe 5 years ago, the reputation of pretty much every single team in Gibraltar, by ourselves and perhaps Gibraltar Lions, was sat at half a star. Now you have most teams on 2.5 stars, 2 stars, which is a really, really impressive kind of rise, and it's quite meteoric. And hopefully over the next few years, obviously, we'll continue to see that trend kind of just go on the way it's going at the moment. Anyway, if we quickly go back to the team stats, I feel like most of them I'd covered. I'm just going to check if there's any more that I feel like are worth going over. I kind of want to give you guys a big overview today, perhaps not so much on our team, because you've seen a lot of the big games really this season for us, but more so on kind of how things in Gibraltar are shaping up as a whole. So we have covered all of these different areas here. But in terms of the actual final league table, just to take a real quick look here, you can see Leo FC won the relegation playoff, which was played at our stadium. I've noticed a fair few games get played at our stadium. And, well, you can see here, looking at the league table, St. Joseph's and Gibraltar Phoenix going down. Lincoln Red Imps, Manchester 62, College Europa, Gibraltar Lions and ourselves all get in Europe. Interesting to note that St. Joseph's, obviously, they got relegated. And they lost to Leo FC, who, new team, of course. And, well, you may notice some of the new kits that you guys submitted. I'm going to talk more about that at the start of next season. But, well, Leo FC here, obviously, a team that are rich. They got relegated last year. And, well, they spent wisely. They, of course, had that TV money from being in the top flight. And they've managed to do one over on St. Joseph's, who themselves will be looking to bounce back. And to be honest, that's a trend that I expect to see in the Primera division. Kind of relegation system is we'll see a lot of teams who go down immediately come back up just because they're so much richer than the teams in the Segunda division. Whether or not the second tier of Gibraltar will get its own TV deal kind of in its own time remains to be seen, but that could really add an interesting dynamic if that was to happen. Anyway, something I always get badgered for, I always forget, I'm going to do it now so I don't forget, is coefficients. So let's get to the Europe screen real quick and have a look at the coefficients. So if we look at nation coefficients, this is of course for the national team. I don't know where we are in this. I guess we are, well, you can see here we're 43rd nationally, which of course is something that's worth kind of paying attention to given the fact we are now the national team manager. And you can see that first cycle, which I don't know what defines a cycle, to be honest, in terms of international. I assume that's the oldest number. It's fairly low compared to the latest number of 17,000. So hopefully over the next few years that will improve. And, of course, naturally, the overall points tally will mean that we rise through the ranks there. But really, what I wanted to show you guys was the club coefficients, which, well, if we look here, we're currently 11th in, which is a really great achievement. This year is going to see a minor drop in terms of the actual coefficient, and actually we'll see us drop outside of the top the top 12, which is a shame, and I'll explain why. So, as you can see here, oh, in fact, it might not matter. If we say 13th, we might be okay. We'll find out in due course. Basically, the way that this works is that, well, you can see here, there are group places for the Champions League and then Europa League spots available depending on your rank. So for us, who are 11th, we get one group stage spot in the Champions League for the coming season, which is this season that we're going into. So because we won the league, we will get that group stage spot, so there will be no playoff this year. Gibraltar Lions will go into the best place playoff. And then you can see there are 3 more spots available. So this one will go to the team in 3rd, which I believe was College Europa. And then Manchester 62 and Lincoln Red Imps will have the qualifying round spots here. Your coefficient is obviously a value that determines how good and how competitive the clubs from your nation have been in Europe. the thing to note is that the more teams you have in, the worse your coefficient is naturally going to be. And the reason for that basically is that a coefficient is the average of all the teams that compete in Europe. Now, if you are in, I think, 13th or 14th, you only have 4 teams compete in Europe. So we make up 25% of our entire nation's coefficient as a club. Unfortunately, because we've risen into the top 12, it means that we have 5 teams competing. And as a result, although we got to the final again this year, that doesn't contribute as much to the percentage, because with there being 5 teams, each team's kind of performance represents kind of 20% of that nation's coefficient. So until the rest of Gibraltar really kind of gets its thumb out of its butthole, wow, that was graphic. But until they do that and they actually get off their arses and do something, unfortunately, we are going to kind of be a yo-yo team, I think, between kind of 11th and 15th, really, where we can kind of hover in and out of this spot because of the fact we're alternating between having 4 and 5 teams kind of competing in the competition as a whole. So anyway, as I said, this year coming that we are going into, we are going to have a spot in the group stage straight out, which is really nice. But unfortunately, because of the way the point system works, you can see the anticipated points. I believe we are going to drop into 13th, which might still be a group stage spot, depending on how things go. I don't think the qualification spaces change. I guess we'll find out in due course. But for now, we are this yo-yo side, which we have been really for the last few years. Anyway, I feel like on that, we've done a pretty good wrap-up of the team as a whole and what's been going on. In terms of money, obviously, we lost the Champions League final, which was a bitterly disappointing kind of result. I'm going to try and quickly find the league awards, because I do feel like they're kind of interesting to see. I'm really hoping that we will eventually win a Champions League, of course, because it's been a bit of a weird few years. But we have a platform to build off, which we've been building off for a long time, I guess you could say. We, of course, won the quadruple this year. It could have been a quintuplet if we won the Champions League, but we've continued to dominate in Europe. Not in Europe, well, we have dominated in Europe, but continue to dominate in Gibraltar as a nation, which I expect to become more of a challenge as the years go on. But in terms of how we've done in, Europe, we really have established ourselves. 2 finals in the last 2 years is nothing to be ashamed of. It's disappointing, I guess, that both have resulted in defeats. But I'm optimistic for what we have going forward. Anyway, I did just find the award, so we can start off here. And as you can see, Gerrard won Player of the Year. This guy, 26 appearances in the league, 42 goals, an 8.75 average rating for him. Paul Smith, second in the chart. He deserves a massive shout out just because he's a player who over the last few years I've really questioned. Can he offer that much to the club? Can he continue to contribute? This year he got 15 goals and 13 assists in the league. In Europe he was massively influential as well for us. He got 8 goals. Well, no, he didn't. That was 8 goals in the Cup. He got 5 goals in the Champions League and 2 assists and a 7.38 average rating as well. Really did contribute a lot this year. And also Gaiganov doing well, the right back. He came 3rd place in the Gibraltarian First Division Player of the Year award with an average rating of 8.42. Gerrard, unsurprisingly, getting the top goalscorer award. Abassan Eder of Gibraltar Lions getting runner-up. A very good Brazilian striker, a player who I'm kind of looking at thinking, if you don't mind staying around in Gibraltar for a few years, I'd certainly take you for the national team. We can see here he joined for £14 million from Bayern Munich. Kind of Gibraltar Lions really flexing their muscles with that signing. But he's been a very, very good player for them. And of course, to get second in the top goal scoring chart's a good achievement for him. Perhaps somewhat surprisingly, Rildo for us, actually the 3rd top goal scorer in the league. A player who, he's been at the club a long time now, the 25-year-old. He's always been kind of a backup player for us, but when he's been called upon, he's done well. This year with the Mosca injury, he got more opportunities than perhaps he's used to, and he really did take them, particularly in the league. And amassing 21 goals is perhaps an indication of that. In terms of the Young Player of the Year, it actually went to Yerry Martel of College Europa. He got, you can see here, 12 assists in 26 games, an 8.05 average rating for him. The Spaniard, 23 years old, looks like a fairly useful right back. Not a player I think will be playing much for Spain, so hopefully he hangs around in Gibraltar for the next 3 years and becomes eligible to play for our national team. In terms of the goal of the season, we actually won it with Gilvan, and we never win goal of the year. I think it's the first time I've won the goal of the year kind of competition. In this FM, I think I actually got the achievement for it, which I don't know really what that says for how good my players are when it comes to scoring goals. Maybe it's just me. I feel like I very, very rarely kind of get a goal of the season, or never mind that, really, a goal of the month I seem to struggle to get at times. Anyway, I wonder if this is the quickest way to view this highlight. What match was the... I can't leave this now. I was going to quickly find the game. Gilvan against Gibraltar Phoenix on the 12th. This is going to be the quicker way to do it, I think, rather than waiting for the runner-up kind of awards to play out. But although this goal, I believe it came right at the end of the game. Yeah, it did, the 88th minute. Although it didn't mean a lot, it was quite a good goal. So I feel like we should at least watch it. Because it was I said I said Gerard before. It was Gilvan who scored this, the Brazilian. If I said Gerard, came against Gibraltar Phoenix. It was already 6-0 at this point. It was a really nice finish though. Glenn Andre, the youngster playing for us, Graffite whipped the ball in. It was headed clear. Gilvan was there. 2 touches, bang. Bob's your uncle. Top right corner. And yeah, a goal worth savouring, I guess. It was a really nice goal. And as I said, don't feel like I ever get the goals of the season, so that was nice. In terms of Manager of the Year, we won it again. I feel a little bit awkward kind of saying that I've won it every year, because at this point it's not really a massively meaningful achievement. Anyway, in terms of the Team of the Year, you can see 8 of our players were selected in the Team of the Year, including Ludwig Jung, Gaiganov and Girard. You can see that the full-back 4 was ours. In midfield, they had a few players. We already talked about Eder, the kind of former Bayern Munich striker, now with Gibraltar Lions. Dominic O'Brien also played well, 25 years old, Englishman, plays for Gibraltar Lions at centre mid, a very, very good player. He's been there the last 2 years, again, a player who I'm hoping might want to stick around, might want to play for Gibraltar, it'd be nice. I thought an interesting player actually at right back, or right mid rather, was this guy, Melcher Lamas. He played 23 games in the Primera Division, got an average rating of 7.0. I'm a little bit perplexed, I guess, as to how he's ended up in the Team of the Year, but fair play to him, the 27-year-old. Despite getting relegated, he was apparently good enough to be worth a spot. Anyway, they are the Primera Division what would you call it, placements. I talked about kits and I mentioned them. You can see a few more of them here. I'll have a quick flick through. So when it comes to the kits, I'm going to talk more about them next season at the start, which will be kind of the unveiling of them, really. It'll be me flicking through all the teams. But I had over 150 shirts sent to me, different designs, and I got a lot. So I have to apologise if you sent in kits and they don't get used. If you got kits used, congrats. Unfortunately, I can't kind of tell and kind of directly congratulate everyone who had kits put into the game. There were a lot of submissions. I did not realise how many of my viewers would be interested in getting involved in making kits. As I said, over 150 submitted. I selected one for every single a set for every single team. That said, I do have a folder containing all the other submissions, and I think, over the next few years, if people want to continue tweeting me their kits, they can. And I'm going to rotate the kits which are on show. We'll update them over time. So hopefully, if you send in a kit, it will get used. If it doesn't, as I said, I had a lot of kits. I'm sorry. There were some really impressive ones which haven't made it. And all in all, I was just kind of blown away by how many of you guys wanted to get involved in making kits. It was a really cool thing to see. Anyway, let's talk about the team now. We've already rambled on for 27 minutes about things that aren't to do with the team. I've not even talked about the Champions League run yet. I'm going to go through this quickly. You guys did see all the games. If you missed any of them, feel free to go back and check the episodes. There's always the kind of Rise to Glory playlist to watch. So in the group stage, it was a bit of a hit and miss affair. We got very fortunate in terms of the fact that we got that comeback against Swansea, and we were also able to do the double over Swansea, a team who really could have caused us some problems had we lost that game to them. In the final game, which you guys didn't see, we beat Utrecht. In terms of the knockout stages, it was an easier run than perhaps last year to the final. We played Atletico first, of course, that memorable 5-0 win opened things up, Mosca getting a hat-trick. We then lost the second leg 4-1. I felt like halfway through that I was going to be panicking and had one of the most embarrassing losses ever. In the next kind of stage, we beat Benfica on aggregate 7-4. A good draw at home followed by a really, really impressive away performance. The difference, Junior, the right midfielder, really stepping up to the plate there. As you can see, currently out with a thigh strain, the 24-year-old Brazilian. Such a good player for us, though, really did show his worth to the team there. We, of course, then beat Bayern Munich 5-4 on aggregate, a game that looked destined to go to extra time. Ultimately was decided by a 91st minute Mosca goal at the Allianz Arena. If last year was kind of the year of impressive home performances and home comebacks, which it kind of was to get to the final, it really relied on some great wins at home to get us through. This year we really kind of turned it up away, really, particularly in the big games, particularly in the game against Benfica and against Bayern. To win against Benfica 4-1 and to beat Bayern 3-2 in their own backyard was a good kind of performance, and particularly off the back of losing that exact same fixture in the group stage 3-0. It was great to do one over on them and kind of make amends, I guess, for that earlier result in the competition. Unfortunately, the final, as you guys saw last time, I want to say it was an anticlimactic one for us in terms of the fact I really thought we had a chance of winning it this year. To reach a second final was a great achievement. I thought we could go one step further with the experience that we kind of collected from last year. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. The 5 early goals conceded really compounded us, and some ill discipline by our entire team really was costly in a game that ultimately we were never really in. You know, to be as many goals as we were down, not even at the end of the first half, I kind of knew at that point that perhaps the dream was dead, and unfortunately it was. But of course, we're going to keep plodding on. The Champions League still very much the initial aim. What we could do from beyond there, I don't know. I'd like to try and win it back-to-back times. Of course, we could have done that by now. Unfortunately for us, we've done a bit of a bottle job in the final on both occasions. Anyway, in terms of the team this year, I'm going to make this fairly brief, I think, rather than go into loads of detail, but the highest kind of appearanced players, or highest capped players, were Ludwig Young with 49 appearances, and also Sebastian Girard, who actually made 50 appearances in total, but 4 of them were on off the bench. Of course, he got 63 goals, which was the highest goal-scoring tally. Club record signing Jorge Assad was the 3rd highest appearance player with 45 appearances. He had an average rating of 7.54, which is not too bad at all. Kabasele also played well, as did Mustafa and Gaiganov. Really, that consistency in our back four and goalkeeper is such a nice factor to have, and well, with all of our back four playing at least 40 games for us this year, really gives you an indication as to how frequently they've played alongside each other. Anyway, looking behind that, Paul Smith perhaps a somewhat surprising inclusion there. Volsky also playing very well, although a lot more of his appearances coming on off the bench. And really, with the exception of the players I've named there, a lot of the players elsewhere have been rotated in and out of the squad quite frequently, which is something I've done more than I expected of this year. Of course, we signed a lot of new young players who I've been trying to give a bit of game time. You can see, for example, Glenn Andre and Ella with 10 and 13 appearances each. They're good young players. We have more good young players in the kind of reserves who are continuing to develop, which is nice. But all in all, it's been a really, really impressive performance by the entire squad. In terms of goals, it was always going to be a worrying factor. I feel like the Mosca injury really kind of left me uneasy, I guess, at how we were going to do going forward. Fortunately for us, players really did step up to the mark. And well, you can see here, Sebastian Girard, 63 goals. If it wasn't for the fact Mosca scored 87 or something crazy like that last year, I'd be raving about that kind of performance. I mean, it was a great year. The fact he got 19 assists as well, so impressive by Sebastian Girard, and also a player who, if we quickly look at the information, has frequently played from centre attacking mid. So like, he's gotten goals wherever he's played, and that's something that is obviously really valuable to have. Paul Smith with 28, surprising if I'm honest. Duz with 26 goals. Rildo with 23. Clement Bergera, a player who I've not talked about a lot, came on a lot of the time as a sub for us, made 6 appearances in Europe, a handful of appearances in other competitions. And yeah, 11 goals and 11 assists for him. Very good for the Frenchman. I'm hoping he might get called up for the French kind of squad for the Euros in the summer, because he did give a good season for us this year, and I think he deserves to be recognised for that, really. Of course, a new man coming into the club for £6.25 million, and that's looking like a really good bit of business for us. Anyway, in terms of the assists, Gaiganov up there, Junior up there, perhaps somewhat surprising really. Kabasele and Gaiganov, I guess the two fullbacks. It's not entirely surprising to see them getting quite so many assists. You can see Kabasele with only 8 in the league this year. That's a bit of a drop on the previous few years. 2 years ago, 20 assists for him. A crazy total, really. As for Gaiganov, he kind of continued to have his assist boots on. He got 14 this year, which is again a drop off from last year. I would largely attribute that to the fact we are now playing the kind of wider 4-2-3-1 a lot more often than the narrower system. I feel like with the narrower system, the fullbacks playing on attack, there's more of a inclination, I guess, for them to go forward and try and make something happen. Whereas with the 4-2-3-1, they don't have to be the only source of kind of crosses into the box. And as a result, the assists have naturally dropped. And well, perhaps a beneficiary of the fact we're playing the wider system more often is a player like Junior here. Of course, naturally a right attacking midfielder, but a player who I've played down the middle a lot in recent years. Last year he had a bit of an iffy season. This year he's really come of age in a lot of ways. A great player, a player who I'm hoping won't end up playing for Brazil and will end up declaring to play for Gibraltar. He's only 24. We need some wide men in the Gibraltar national side, and he'd be an ideal player, really. He's such a good player, and well, at 24 he's still got a lot of years ahead of him really to have a big impact for us. Anyway, in terms of average ratings, a few players you can see here with high average ratings who didn't play quite so many games. I feel like Glenn Andre deserves a little bit of a nod. He is, of course, 17 years old. He played 9 times in the Primera Division and got an average rating of 8.42 for us. He got an 8.65 average rating in all competitions, and to be honest, he was a very impressive player for us, the 17-year-old. And it's a great first season for him. He's continued to develop, which is nice. And alongside Dominic Eller, the other 17-year-old, he's really been playing in the first team fairly frequently this year. It looks like we've got two really, really good players that we're going to be desperate to keep hold of in our ranks. Ella here, not perhaps improved as much as I hoped he would, but he played 23 games in all competitions for us, and an 8.20 average rating for him this season. Again, pretty impressive for a player who's only 17, very much in his first year. In terms of our reserves and players perhaps performing well who deserve a nod, Juan's played very well this year, the Spaniard, a player whose jumping reach I somewhat question. I feel like long term he'll probably end up being a centre defensive mid, but I want to persist with trying to train him to become a centre back at least for now. If that jumping in reach can improve by a few, we might be okay. But other than that, he's a very good kind of defensive player who has developed a lot this year. Klos has also done well this year, Jean-Francois Klos, the 17-year-old Frenchman, improving as a winger a lot. Really impressive stuff by him, really. Another player who's really impressed me actually has been, if I can find him, Bismarck here, who is, of course, a Brazilian, 19 years old, been on loan at Vitória in Portugal, and he's played very well for them. He's their key player. He's played a fair bit for them, 12 league games, 4 goals, 2 assists. Not bad for a 19-year-old by any means, and there's a few other players here I could go through. Really, with our kind of youth side, there's perhaps too many players for me to frequently update you guys on the performances of. So I think for the sake of my sanity and also to not get you guys too overloaded with players from my save, when it comes to the youngsters, I'll kind of talk about players if they really break through into the first team or if they really do impress me. There's 3 players I'll talk about real quick. Seydou Boka here, a player I brought in a while ago. I didn't talk much about him. He actually came in January officially upon his was it his contract ending? I can't even remember. We signed him from a team that may be familiar to long-term viewers of my save, ASEC. Of course, Sonogo, who was in our Lewis save, came from ASEC. They're a good team. They're a very good team for finding youngsters. I recommend checking them out in the Ivory Coast. You can see he's played 2 games for the Ivory Coast national team, got 1 goal. He's kind of a little bit one-dimensional, a lot of really good physicals, good pace and kind of good finishing ability, but not a lot else. But perhaps a player to keep an eye out on, may even come into the team next year as a bit of a backup. We then have Juan Carlos Reyes, the Colombians, 18 years old, been on loan at Bordeaux this year, played 15 Ligue 1 games for them, not performed particularly well, but for an 18-year-old to be getting regular first-team football in a top-flight league in France is good for his development, and hopefully he can continue on with that. And the last player I want to talk about, really, is this guy, Karanci. He is an American player who kind of got brought into the team with a lot of kind of hype around him. He's been at the club for the last 3 years and really hasn't had a massive impact. He's a player I'm kind of looking at, hoping that the USA national side won't pick him up and that he will become eligible for the Gibraltar national team in just 2 years' time. Looking at his contract doesn't run out for 4 years, so I'm kind of determined to keep hold of this guy. I want to say I want to leave him rotting in the reserves in terms of I don't want to bring him up as a player that the USA national team are going to want to pick up. I don't want other teams bidding on him. But really, I'm just content to try and keep him in the team for the next 2 years. So hopefully he will decide that he wants to play for Gibraltar. And he would be a really valuable asset because we are lacking wide men. And an option on the left would be useful for us. Anyway, I feel like that is a fairly adequate review of our season and kind of what's been going on at the club. Of course, financially, things are looking pretty good. We have almost £120 million in the bank. As you can see here, we actually have £141 million in the bank, which is a really impressive amount, really. I guess that's all the prize money that we got kind of today, or yesterday as I record this, in the Champions League final, because that kind of totaled 11 million, as you can see there. Anyway, in terms of the plan for next season, really, it's got to be to continue to push on in Europe. I'm hoping to see the Gibraltar Primera Division continue to get competitive, of course. In an ideal scenario, this summer, I might bring in 1 or 2 players. I'd like to get in perhaps a few more backup wingers. I feel like that's an area of the pitch we're somewhat lacking in, particularly with us becoming more and more dependent on the kind of more common now 4-2-3-1 system as opposed to the narrower system. In terms of actual transfers, though, besides the wingers, I don't really want to do another summer of just signing a load of youngsters like I did this year. I might do a little bit more of that, but what I'd really like to do actually is try and find some second-rate players playing in leagues like Spain, England and France, bring them into our team if we can, kind of look at championship teams, bet hot prospects, sign them, players who are unlikely to play for the England national team, the same in Spain if they're unlikely to play for the Spanish national team. If we can find players kind of between the ages of 18 and 22, really, I'd like to bring them in, 5-year deals, leave them in the reserves, and hopefully they'll become eligible to Gibraltar. And in some ways, I'm perhaps gaming the system somewhat because I am the Gibraltar national kind of team manager, but I feel like in bringing in some players like that, players who I can spend some money on, bring them in, they're unlikely to play for their national teams, and hopefully we can develop them into Gibraltarian national team players. That's not only going to benefit me in terms of I can sell them at a club level to other Gibraltarian clubs, hopefully long term, but in terms of as the Gibraltar national team manager, it should give us some really strong reinforcements to add some depth to the side and also add some players in perhaps positions that we need long term. Anyway, that is going to wrap up all from me for this episode, guys. Really appreciate you guys watching. It was a longer one, 40 minutes. I probably could have gone on for a little bit longer, but I feel like this kind of end of season review, we talked a lot about coefficients, about the league, how that's developing. All in all, though, still really enjoying the save. Really interesting to see how the kind of teams this summer approach things. Of course, we still have Euro 2036 to look forward to. The group stage for that was drawn, I want to say. Was it drawn? Now I'm doubting myself. Let's have a quick look. It was drawn. You can see here we have Turkey, Croatia and England. So that's going to be an interesting set of games. Certainly the opening game will be coming next episode. I've not decided on the format. Stick around for that though. Of course, that will be part of the Rise of a Nation kind of sub-series. If you missed the first one of that, it was the qualifying games that you can see here. Again, definitely worth going and checking out. So yeah, that is all from me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you've got any comments, questions, anything like that about this save, feel free to leave them down below. If you've watched until this point, smash the like button. And other than that, it is me, Jack, and I will talk to you guys in a bit. I'm out.